the Taliban, it's sending Afghan women to jail. This is to protect them, apparently, from gender-based violence. The Taliban, it's limited the access of women to almost everything in the country. According to a UN report, women with no male relatives to stay with or who have male relatives considered unsafe are then sent to prison to keep them safe. Taliban authorities also asked the male relatives for commitments or sworn statements that they will not harm a female relative. Local elders are also invited to witness these guarantees. Before the Taliban took power in 2021, Afghanistan had 23 state-sponsored women protection centers. Now, there are none. The Taliban claims shelters are a Western concept and there's no need for them. Afghanistan has often ranked as one of the worst places in the world for women. After the Taliban took over in 2021, it barred women and girls from education beyond class 6th. They are banned from public spaces, parks, and most jobs. As per the UN report, women are permitted to attend work only when called by male supervisors. The Taliban decree in July also shut down all beauty salons. Women are required to take a male chaperone on journeys of over 72 kilometers. Human rights groups have said the Taliban rule, it will enable violence against women and demolish legal protections for them. The Taliban is sending Afghan women to jail to protect them from gender-based violence. It has limited the access of women to almost every sphere of public life, and according to a UN report now, women who have no male relatives to stay with or who do have male relatives who are considered not safe for them are sent to prison to keep them safe. Now, for more on this, we are being joined live by Ramita Navai. She's a journalist, documentary maker and an author. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. In the latest that we're getting from Afghanistan, the Taliban, it's a new mandate for women. Women are now being sent to prison to keep them safe, according to a UN report. Taliban authorities also asked male relatives for commitments or sworn statements. Now, for more on this, we're being joined live by Ramita Navai. She's a journalist, documentary maker and an author. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, of course, there's another twisted strategy by the Taliban for women. How do you assess this? They say that shelters are a Western concept, so they feel that sending women to prisons, that's a better option. What's your assessment of this bizarre new policy that they appear to have?
Well, frankly, nothing surprises me, and I think very few people believed them in their first press conference when they took control of the country 2 years ago, and they said that they promised the international community that women would have rights. And of course, we've seen over the last 2 years that not only have women not got rights, that there's been a steady encroachment on their rights. And actually, we were there when the Taliban started closing women's shelters. And back then, about 2 years ago, when women's shelters were either being closed or women's shelters were closing down themselves in fear of what would happen to them if they were caught by Taliban members, the women in those shelters back then were being transferred to prisons. So actually what's happening now is not new, bizarre but not new.
You're right, no education for women before, beyond class 6th. They're not allowed to go to beauty salons, as you mentioned, not allowed to go to parks. Of course, they need a male chaperone at all times. Now, with this new mandate, now women protection centers, there are none in Afghanistan. This just is further going to erode women's rights further in the country. What's your assessment of how things can unfold, and what is your take on what the international community should be doing for the women of Afghanistan?
Well, just as you think it can't get any worse, it does get any worse. Millions and millions of women can no longer get an education in Afghanistan. Never mind going to beauty salons. Most women now are imprisoned in the four walls of their own homes. There is absolute gender apartheid right now in Afghanistan, and that's having terrifying effects on society. One of those effects is another story that the Taliban doesn't want out, and that is a really sharp rise in suicides, in female suicides. So most countries in the world, male suicide rates are higher than female suicide rates, not in Afghanistan. And actually, I spoke to doctors who told me that they were being told not to register female suicides by the Taliban. So this is having a terrible and deep effect on society. What can be done? Well, the international community needs to fight against gender apartheid, needs to criminalize gender apartheid internationally, so women in Afghanistan and Iran, countries like Iran, will be protected. The international community needs to start promoting and speaking to Afghan female leaders, and there are extraordinary Afghan female leaders they can do this with, and that's what we need to do to promote these women in the international community.
You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Of course, the situation is dire in the country, to say the least. Thank you so much for joining us on the show with your perspective on this.
Thank you for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.